Updated the 13th of March 2018, 20:05 Australian Eastern Daylight Time. One of the coldest northern winters for many years proved a piece of good fortune for the Winter Olympics in South Korea, but it may be the last happy moment on the Korean Peninsula for a long time. A war there is a distinct possibility. Some form of military action to disrupt North Korean nuclear weapon developments is even more likely. Diplomacy may have run its course. We are at the most dangerous moment since the Korean War armistice in 1953. A war today could have unimaginable consequences, a catastrophic death toll, missile strikes beyond the peninsula, the first nuclear bombs to be used in conflict since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The risk has long been real, and in 2018, with Donald Trump in the White House, it is alarmingly high. Events unfolding on the Korean Peninsula and in Washington are pointing in a direction that is difficult, but essential, to contemplate. A fear of mass civilian casualties and the perception that North Korea has a low bar on preemption have haunted U.S. administrations. At least 10 major North Korean atrocities and provocations since 1967 have been essentially passed over. The response has been sporadic attempts at diplomacy, backed by ever-tightening sanctions. The Obama administration, faced with a paucity of good options and a hope that at some point the North Koreans would bend, articulated the Allied tactic as strategic patience. The Trump administration has said those days are over. Insecure enemies. What has changed to bring us to this point? The first shift is the emergence of Kim Jong-un as supreme leader following his father's death in 2011. Clearly the most insecure of the dynastic line, Mr. Kim's regime has been marked by regular and brutal purges of his retinue and deepening oppression of his people. North Korea's nuclear capabilities are entwined with Mr. Kim's legitimacy. Recognition of North Korea's status as a nuclear power is non-negotiable. Last year there were 23 tests of missile capability, culminating in the launch of the Hwa-15 intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM. At that point, Mr. Kim declared his program complete. Mr. Kim's 2018 New Year statement attracted attention for its outreach to South Korea, an obvious attempt to drive a wedge between the United States and its ally. This produced a flurry of diplomacy to include the North in the Winter Olympics. For some, this raised hopes. But most observers had the sense that we had been here before, and none should be fooled. More significant was Mr. Kim's indication that North Korea will focus on mass-producing nuclear warheads and ballistic missiles for operational deployment. The second major change in the Korean situation is the election of Mr. Trump. His approach to national security has deviated more from his campaign promises than any other set of policies. He has dismissed allies, including South Korea, even suggesting that nation might want to provide its own nuclear umbrella. He sensed his voter base was tired of American commitments and wars, yet now finds himself on the verge of a war that would dwarf any in recent times. Mr. Trump's grasp of most matters in international politics and military affairs is rudimentary. His interventions, by tweet or otherwise, provoke instant mockery among the informed community. But he is the man in charge, and so his views bear close analysis. They reveal his method of processing the information and intelligence he is receiving. In response to a New Year nuclear boast from Mr. Kim, Mr. Trump tweeted, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un just stated that the nuclear button is on his desk at all times. Will someone from his depleted and food-starved regime please inform him that I too have a nuclear button, but it is a much bigger. Mr. Trump is seriously contemplating a war to disarm North Korea of its weapons. In the middle, it would be folly to assume that Mr. Trump's views are not widely held within his administration. His national security advisor, H.R. McMaster, who has described North Korea as the greatest immediate threat to the United States, is a leading proponent of military action. This has posed some unique challenges for the Secretary of Defense, Jim Mattis, who understands the scale of a likely conflagration. Mr. Mattis has repeatedly warned that a conflict with North Korea would be catastrophic, while also providing assurances of the ultimate outcome, total U.S. victory and the end of Pyongyang's nuclear program, so as to maintain deterrence. Mr. Mattis works in tandem with the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, to achieve a diplomatic solution through a tighter sanctions regime. But Mr. Mattis matters to Mr. Trump, Mr. Tillerson doesn't. Mr. Trump was angry about Mr. Tillerson's suggestion that the U.S. was prepared to begin talks with North Korea without preconditions. Mr. Trump is more on with his UN ambassador, Nikki Haley, who stated in January, "We consider this to be a very reckless regime. We don't think we need a band-aid and we don't think we need to smile and take a picture. We think we need to have them stop nuclear weapons and they need to stop it now. Mr. Trump's principal source of advice is the Pentagon, which for years has worked on military options to preempt North Korea. The Pentagon's primary duty is to work out how things can be done, a different task from saying whether they should be. Those who carry the diplomatic argument are sidelined. This leaves Mr. Mattis in the weighty position of having to find both a solution and the enabling argument. Battle options. Mr. Mattis says the U.S. has some potential military options that would not result in the devastation of Seoul, though he has not provided any details. How would it be done? An apparent, preferred option, is the use of joint CIA and Special Forces teams, like those used in Afghanistan in 2001, to seize the nuclear sites. However, a covert operation of this kind would probably not be a standalone activity. Extensive use of bombers and cruise missiles is likely. The possibility of a broader war through an accident or misinterpretation is substantial. What would be the North Korean reaction to a limited punitive event? If Mr. Kim is as rational as is commonly claimed, a cruise missile strike to preempt a test would hardly trigger a massive response. Most likely, it would be a hit at a soft South Korean target or military base, or a cyber attack. But neither a limited operation nor a wholesale assault on North Korea's nuclear capabilities could be attempted without having in place the mechanisms for an all-out war. Defending Seoul would require the rapid degrading of the mortar, rocket, missile and artillery capabilities ranged against it. Given the erosion of North Korea's conventional capabilities, that might be doable. The problem would lie in what Mr. Kim might do in a situation where his regime's survival was in question. He secreted nuclear weapons that could unleash devastation on South Korea and Japan. Half a dozen weapons would be economy-destroying, a dozen would be civilization-destroying. This brings us back to the question of why Mr. Trump would try. For him, the game is simple. North Korea shall not have an ICBM. For the experts and advisors advocating a preemptive strike, it goes to the nature of Mr. Kim's regime. North Korea is a nuclear power like no other, and its intentions are an open question. Does North Korea desire a nuclear capability simply for deterrence and regime survival, or does it have a more aggressive ambition to use that capability to try to reunify the peninsula? Diplomatic alternatives. It is difficult to imagine that a preemptive U.S. strike can do anything other than risk the devastation of South Korea and Japan, with dreadful human and environmental consequences. Small wonder former Trump strategist Steve Bannon said, before leaving the White House, there's no military solution, forget it, there is a closing, not closed, window for diplomacy. Any attack would need to be preceded by a comprehensive diplomatic strategy involving China. The U.S. might want to test the waters with China and North Korea on solutions involving a major stand-down rather than entire elimination of North Korea's nuclear capability. We probably have not yet seen the weight China is capable of bringing to bear on North Korea. It would have to be a great deal to bring Mr. Kim to heel, and it is difficult to envisage such an outcome that would not undermine his sense of his regime's legitimacy. It is not yet midnight, but as the crisis deepens, the diplomatic and military options get more and more complex. In averting catastrophe, having a bigger nuclear button will not guarantee success. That is obvious to most informed observers. But is it obvious to Mr. Trump? The answer is unknowable. What is certain is that his own sense of legitimacy is bound up in North Korea having no ICBMs. Richard Haass, president of the Council on Foreign Relations, puts the prospect of war at 50-50. The prediction is chilling. This is going to be a hard year. That judgment remains valid, but last week a sliver of light appeared. Motivated at least in part by concern over the march toward confrontation we described, both during and after the Olympics, South Korean President Moon Jae-in has sought to buy time for diplomacy. High-level negotiators from the South, following meetings with the North, reported a possibility their counterparts might be prepared to put their nuclear capability on the table in return for security guarantees. Some analysts suggest the latter means the removal of U.S. forces and guarantees to the South. They might think about it, essentially a delaying tactic. Mr. Moon wants to test this at a meeting with his counterpart. Mr. Trump himself said this might be a start. Certainly in terms of management of allied relationships, the U.S. would want to see what it means, though public statements by the North suggests it is pressing on with the nuclear plan. Past experience would indicate this is nothing more than an effort at confusion. Still, we don't know how the other side of the hill interprets Mr. Trump's obvious preparedness for war. The U.S. will certainly need to do some thinking about a matter that has attracted only sporadic attention to date. What does a diplomatic endgame look like? One senses the U.S. clock is still ticking to midnight, and this is not an endless process without credible developments. A hard year ahead remains the case. This is an edited extract of Kim Beazley and L. Gordon Flake's essay in Australian Foreign Affairs to Trump in Asia, The New World Disorder. Kim Beazley is Senior Fellow at the Perth Youth Asia Centre, part of the University of Western Australia, and a former Australian ambassador to the US. L. Gordon Flake is CEO of the Perth Youth Asia Centre. This article first appeared on The Conversation.